had 3 rooms, 3 full studios at MSR. The other 2 rooms had SSL-J series. We also had lots of Neve mic pre's in all 3 rooms. And what the trend that I noticed was that people were recording through the Neves whenever they could, not the SSL. I decided to sell the SSLs and to go kind of take a step back to getting a Neve V series console, be with recall and flying faders, for the reason being that I just personally think that the front end on the Neves is a more pleasing sound. I like some of that kind of lower mid frequencies that Neves tend to have. I mean, sometimes it could be problematic in mixing, but if you knew how to use it, not really. It's just a great sounding console. And the Neve in particular that we have, which is in Studio A, it was originally at Blue Jay Studios in the Boston area, and John Musgrave kind of turbocharged the thing. So I mean, he expanded it to 72 channels. He did all these upgrades with better signal flow, higher voltage on the chips that are running the board, so there's more headroom. It just tends to have a punchier sound than most other VRs that are out there. And also we did a lot of work to really bring it up to speed. One of the cool things if you do mix on it is it's got 4 stereo buses. So one of the things John also did was incorporated some of the features of a VRP series into a standard VR. And all the increased sonic upgrades that John did, including his discrete mix bus cards for all 8 outputs. So it does have a very special sound. Everybody who's used it, myself included, really rave about how great it sounds. The Euphonics that I'm sitting in front of, that was in our B studio, was originally brought to Right Track, replacing a Neve Capricorn. Neve chose not to continue the Capricorn by making it work at higher sampling rates than 48K. NARIS and a number of other music-oriented organizations are advocating that things be done at least 24-bit and preferably at 96K sampling. So having a console that was locked to 48 made it not really usable moving forward. So the reason I held on to the System 5 and didn't get a second Neve VR or maybe an older SSL, which are popular for mixing, is because from a mix standpoint, the System 5, since it's digital and communicates via MADI with Pro Tools, we did these huge feature film mixes on it. The last big one that was done before we closed MSR was Into the Woods. It's got a very transparent sound. The EQs, the compression are very usable. And we just had an engineer in the other day who hadn't really used this until recently and just marveled to me about how great the onboard EQ and onboard dynamics are. In the B room, we found that the Euphonics mic pre's really are quite exceptional and do hold their own against anything out there. So the other thing it does, which is really amazing, is it's a wonderful Yukon controller, so it can control any workstations that do Yukon protocol. And that's a big step up from the Huey-based protocols that little mini mixers would use to control Pro Tools. I mean, even SSL to this day doesn't go beyond Huey protocol. So this full total control, almost like the old Icons, plus there's processing, so you can mix and match to your heart's content. You set up as many levels and as many layers with whatever channels you want. And we found that once people get through their initial kind of fear of the console, they find it's actually pretty easy to use. I had this relationship with George, as somebody who had designed speaker systems for Sound on Sound back in the 90s. We loved the sound of the monitors. When we joined forces with Right Track and merged our businesses in 2005, those studios had Genelec main monitoring. We found that almost to a person, none of our clients liked the main monitors with the Genelecs. They loved Genelec near fields, but they didn't like them for mains. So we retrofitted 2 of the rooms that later became MSR Studios A and C, the 2 rooms with the SSL-Js, we put the Augsburger systems in. One of the things we found was that because those control rooms were huge, they were like 500 and 600 square foot control rooms, that coming from the smaller rooms that the original Sound on Sound, our Augsburgers needed some additional help. We ended up having to bring in pairs of subs in each room, and also we went with the super tweeters, which, as far as I know, we're the only East Coast studio that had super tweeters on an Augsburger system. And there are a couple on the West Coast, but they're also not that common. The big advantage that they have is that they're able to handle things above the range of the normal tweeter, and the tweeter systems in most horn systems tend to get a little directional and aggressive at certain frequencies, and a super tweeter seems to be a very nice compromise about getting rid of that directional aggressive sound and making them much smoother and more listenable pretty much at any volume level. So moving in here, when I did the assessments, and once again I did consult with George on this and talked about the frequency response and what would be necessary, and George felt very strongly that dual subs in rooms that are, 300 square feet would be completely and totally unnecessary, and I have to say I agree with him, but we did actually keep a pair of subs, one for each studio, and for clients who want that, it's a matter of flipping a switch and they're on and they're part of the main system, and they do actually, I have to say, they're kind of fun with certain kinds of music, they really are. One of the things I noticed is that people aren't mixing on big consoles anymore. When they do, they're using it as big summing bus. It's not like the old days where if you didn't have 80 channels or more, it wasn't big enough. Now so much is pre-mixed in the box, and when things come through the console, it's more for flavor, using the console as a tonal enhancer. Plugins are pretty much taking the place of Outboard. Reverbs, delays, signal processing, it's all in the box. Now, one thing that I was looking for this place to be able to do more effectively than we were able to do at MSR was to be more of a hybrid approach. So, plugins that replaced Outboard but still using a console to do the mixing on. Some people have embraced that, some have not yet, but I think once they try it, they're going to be hooked. So MSR had probably 4 or 5 racks worth of gear in each of the 3 studios. As more and more stuff has been mixed in the box over the last 5 to 10 years, with the console really literally being used as a giant summing bus, we found that people weren't using most of the Outboard gear, especially like the delays, the reverbs, the effects processors. What they were using were mic pre's for the front end. So there has always been this bias. There was the old adage of record on a Neve, mix on an SSL. Well, now it's mix in the box and use SSL emulations. So we've got them. We've got 3 different manufacturer versions of SSL emulations, as well as Neve emulations and other stuff. So that we had covered from a mixing standpoint for people who are going to choose to come here to mix. But as far as the front end, the mic pre's were the be-all end-all. And we just found the bias for the Neve mic pre's. That was what compelled me to sell both SSLs and literally go out and find a used Neve to replace them. We do have floating racks, and the whole idea of the floating racks was to have a dozen channels. If you used all the mic pre's, the EQs, and the compressors that we have here, you would have at least a dozen channels of off-board mic pre, EQ, and compression.